Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them.
Hey, Andrea.
Hi, Janelle. And welcome, brave hearts, to Permission to be Human.
Andrea has one of her voices in this moment. I can tell. I don't exactly know what it means, like what's going on, but it usually means something's going on.
No, I think, I had some feeling going on just then. Mm-hmm. Okay, processing feeling. Okay.
Today's topic, Brave Hearts, is about things that we don't want to be talking about, which of course is funny. But those things include venting and commiseration. When is it appropriate and when is it not? We're going to be talking about likes and dislikes, and are those significant and relevant? We're talking about out loud processing, when we are discerning who to talk to about that and why.
And if it helps us to out loud process or not. Mm-hmm. There's a quote that my brother, Philip, used to say, not frequently, but he has said it a few times to me, by Eleanor Roosevelt, that says, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. And so it's a good way to kick off our podcast today.
We do a little shout out to Human Design, which is a modality that helps us make decisions. And then also we're talking about judgment and what do we want to be talking about?
Okay. All right. So we're going to get into this. So I think the next, I want you to tell the story about when you first met your ex-husband.
Yes.
So what happened with that?
So Brave Hearts, you've have a sense of me. I'm an outgoing extrovert, talk a lot. And when I met my ex-husband, or he still is this, he's a quiet introvert. Mm-hmm. And when I asked him about, we'd be in a group of people, and I was like, okay, do you just not want to share your thoughts and your opinions in a group of people? And what he shared was that he wasn't interested in sharing about the minutia of his day, such as flight and delays and doctor's appointments and traffic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that he noticed that a lot of the conversations that I had were about what we liked and didn't like. And for him, he was much more interested in the impact of something and the feeling of something versus whether we liked it or didn't like it.
Okay. So there's a lot there. So let's start though at the beginning. So first, he didn't want to talk about the minutia. Mm-hmm. And so what was the shift in you then that you made?
It had me be aware of that, right? That I used to think I was a good communicator because I talked a lot. But I actually started noticing that I was uncomfortable with silence and listening. And so eventually I started talking less and listening more. So his comment just brought the awareness to me of how I was.
Okay, so how is it that you got more comfortable with the silence?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have an answer specifically to it, but what I recognized is that I could listen more, right? If I'm not talking, I'm listening more. Mm-hmm. And so that part of the silence was just me not talking. Mm-hmm. And then part of getting comfortable with the silence was with two, if it was just two of us, right? That sometimes it was okay to have nothing to say.
Yeah, this silence is something that definitely plagues me as well. Although I do think with certain people, it's fine. And with others, I cannot get to the comfort in the silence. Mm-hmm. My goal is to just be like, no, we don't have to talk all the time. Mm-hmm. This is something actually that my daughter is very comfortable having a long car ride and not talking. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, oh, but no, why would we do that? Probably just because I want to communicate with her and talk to her. But I think both my family members are actually like way more comfortable. It's just like, okay, like we're just having a quiet dinner. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm just like a little bit for me, it's just like, oh, there's something wrong with this. Like I'm okay with silence, but a long stretch without talking, yeah, like it feels flawed or something to me. Mm-hmm. Deep down, even though like rationally I know maybe it's not. So this is important in itself.
So you're reminding me, right? Like we're kind of going into like also some of the differences between introverts and extroverts. But so I will make the comment.
True.
I remember having a conversation with my dad about introverts and about my husband in particular. And he was like, well, I just thought people who didn't speak weren't very bright or had nothing to say or something like that. And I was like, oh, Dad. And I bought him the book Quiet by Susan Cain. Because as you know, like my ex-husband is like one of the smartest people I know.
Yeah, for sure.
So to assume, I was like, oh, Dad, to assume silence means that there's nothing going on in there is a real big myth.
So true. So true. Yeah. And it's a whole other episode, introverts versus extroverts. Okay. So my aha moment, which kind of sparked this episode, I've been having conversations, with a friend, and I feel like the bulk of those conversations is us venting and commiserating. Mm-hmm. Now, overall, I'm just realizing I don't want to spend an hour bitching about our healthcare delays and flight issues and doctor appointments and traffic and how something didn't work out. And just like, there's no benefit there. There's no value. But at the same time, I feel like, does commiserating and venting serve a purpose? Because sometimes it does. If you've just come home and had a really hard day, it's helpful for me to tell someone about it. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a fine line between sometimes it helps me, and then other times it just pisses me off more about what happened.
Yeah. I think of it in that what you just described as an energy release.
Right.
Right? And so can you get the energy out? And can you get the energy out in a way that is either more productive, doesn't activate you further.
Yeah.
And or also doesn't bring the energy to somebody else.
Right.
Who doesn't actually, whose day was fine. So that would be my other question.
I guess the question is, are you offloading onto someone? Mm-hmm. At the same time, though, usually the things that like someone might be offloading to me aren't triggering to me because they didn't happen to me.
No. I'm not saying triggering in that way. Like, because you had just said sometimes me speaking about it more gets me more upset.
Right.
So I was talking about you. I just mean, but like, so not that you're causing the other person to be activated, but just like you're still like you're just like dumping energy onto someone that just doesn't feel good. It doesn't even have to be activating.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. And I'm not sure. Like sometimes I feel like if you live alone and you don't have anyone to talk to about like said thing, there just can be this bottling up. And I think I'm trying to think about moving toward a practice, whether that's journaling or emotionally releasing, to get rid of that energy from the day if I had a difficult day.
Yes.
So that seems smart.
And I'm doing the artist way right now, which includes writing for a 3-month period of time, writing longhand in a journal.
Right.
3 pages every morning. And part of it is to write out these emotions. So like they're getting out of your system and then you're not holding them. I mean, the most important thing is not to hold them, but then also in our conversation now, you're not also like just passing them on to somebody else.
Yeah. And I was advised by my Ayurvedic specialist like to journal before I go to bed to get all this stuff out so I'm not thinking about it with anxiety and then not sleeping.
Interesting.
And that can be helpful too.
Have you been doing that?
Sometimes if I feel like I'm really like stacked and, just my mind's swirling. And I think you mentioned though too, that if you're going to vent, you need to discern who to do it with.
Yes, I agree. Because making sure that they can hold it and like, so do they have the capacity to hold?
Yeah.
Right? Where are they at? Like, so asking them.
Yes.
Is part of that process. Hey, this shitty thing happened to me today. Do you have time for me to just talk about it? Do you have the capacity for me to talk about it?
Yeah, which is great.
Is one thing. But also recognizing if it is about somebody else, that it's really not about the other person. It's still something in me that I'm expressing, right? Like if I'm activated, you and I talk about a lot about trying not to blame someone else. If we are blaming someone else, then ultimately it's still a mirror to ourselves. And so we're talking about, if I'm venting at someone else, can I notice, am I putting myself into a victim state?
Yeah.
And do I just want the other person who I'm venting to agree with me to make me feel better?
And two things come up for me there. One is that, that triple H, like asking, okay, do you need heard, helped, or hugged? Right? Like, what is the response you're looking for here of the person who's venting? And then Liz Gilbert in the recent interview with Tim Ferriss, which I keep referencing because it keeps coming up in different ways. She said, she's like, no, I've been celibate and single for 5 years. And I just find that when I'm alone, there's no one else to blame except me. And she just has this habit of doing that, right? And so there's something interesting to like, oh, she's probably not venting to anyone, right, on a regular basis.
Right.
So something to think about. Okay, so preferences. Yeah, I do want to dig into preferences and likes.
Well, as I mentioned, like I used to talk a lot, and now I think I talk much less. And I sit in silence, listening a lot more. And I think part of the reason why that happened is because I have removed a lot of the surface level topics from my conversation about what I like and don't like, which was the primary way that I approached the world, what I valued and what I shared about.
I think we're saying preferences are on the surface a little bit. And I think you mentioned like how we're feeling during these things we love is the good stuff, like how we're feeling in the moment. So,
right, like it's so funny when I think of you and like here's the music that you like. What I actually vision for you is like I've seen you do this, right? Like your head is shaking, you've got your energy, you're totally, you're screaming the lyrics at the top of your lungs, you're dancing, you're moving, and so how it makes you feel to me is why you like 80s music. Like what's alive for us? Like what do we feel in this moment? Like that feels more important and more relevant.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. So let's talk about out loud processing. When is it okay and not okay to be an out loud processor?
Again, comes back to discernment. I know that listening to myself talk about a situation, I can hear often the solution as I'm talking.
Yeah.
It's like the other person doesn't even necessarily have to respond. It's very beneficial to me to hear myself. I remember, talking about husbands, right? That they're often our partners are the person who's home. And so that's who we're processing with, right?
Totally.
But I remember at some point towards the end of our marriage, when my husband said to me, I just need so much processing. It was exhausting for him. And I remember actually laughing out loud because I was like, oh, I know I need a lot of processing. And I'm giving you 2% of my processing, and I'm processing with Andrea and with Sophie and with Touch, the other 98% of my processing.
It was still too much for him.
It was still too much for him. And so recognizing that the difference in his capacity and what I needed was even greater than I had already discerned it, but it was even greater than I had realized.
Yeah.
And so, and no judgment. I think sometimes we're trying to say, well, you should increase your capacity then to hold me.
Not
necessarily. But that's actually not the case. And so it was like on me to continue to discern more.
Recently, I'm working with someone and they say, oh, when are you available next week? And I'm starting with, well, I can't do Tuesday and Thursday because of da-da-da-da. She's like, Andrea, I don't need to know when you're not available. I'm asking when you are available. And I'm like, hey, I'm processing. I'm figuring it out. And I need to do that out loud. And she doesn't like that. And I'm just like, too bad. Like this is kind of how I am. Like, and so I'm not choosing to externally process with her. I'm externally processing a schedule. And so I have to choose either I'm going to try to change to sort of accommodate that or just be like, I'm sorry, this is just kind of how I need to do it to figure out what days work for me.
So I'm curious, just out of curiosity, if you didn't say it out loud, if you just looked at your calendar in silence, have you ever tried that?
Yeah, I'm sure I have many times because I've had to, because I couldn't say it all or whatever. It's definitely more ease for me to process it out loud. I know that. I'm sure I could do the internal processing if I wanted to. But yeah, there's something in me that's just like, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm not.
Right, you're actually not. What it sounds
I'm not doing anything to them.
Right, what it sounds like is that you're not actually. Doesn't even matter that they're on the call. Right? You're not actually externally processing to them. You're just speaking out loud to yourself, and they can hear it.
Exactly.
So
that's pretty much what's happening.
Right. I also think there's something for us right now, like with the term externally processing.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about this with Bravehearts, because I think that I think of external processing as it is a back and forth. Like, hey, I'm externally processing.
Volley.
I'm expecting someone to be on the other side participating in that.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that you actually don't need someone on the other side. You're just talking out loud, and you don't actually need them to respond. And someone's just waiting for you to stop talking to make the decision. Mm-hmm. So is that different than external processing? Because you don't actually need the other person to be involved?
It's two different forms of it, I would say. One of them is just figuring something out. Another one is like, oh my gosh, all this happened to me. I have to figure out how to deal with my boyfriend or whatever. Yeah. Those are just different situations.
Yeah. But so thinking back to my relationship, what I remember his reflection to me was, he's like, I'm spending so much time listening to you, I don't know what I'm supposed to be listening to. Like, you're saying so many words, and actually more than half of them are not relevant.
Yeah.
But I don't know they're not relevant to me because you're still talking to me, but yet you don't need me to do anything. And so he's like, I'm like on alert, trying to figure out what is being expected of me, and nothing's being expected of me, but you're still talking.
We're getting into different territory, that there are some people who just talk continuously, and there's no way I want to respond, but there's no space to respond. Mm-hmm. And I don't think just because you're externally processing doesn't mean you're doing that.
Right.
That's just a bad listener.
That's another.
Okay, so then you said something about human design.
Yes. So human design is a modality that helps people understand how they make decisions. And there's 4 different types. Mm-hmm. And one type is a reflector, which I am. And one of the qualities of my decision-making process is the importance of talking to others so I can hear myself speak.
Right.
It's actually like within that characteristic of myself.
Okay.
And as I'm listening to myself, I'm often getting my answers. But I also know that for big decisions, it can take me more than, it's called a lunar cycle, but more than a month before the answer like lands in my system. So I have learned that this external processing has a purpose for me, but that I also have to give myself the spaciousness to know it's going to take a while before I can make a decision. Mm-hmm. For you, as a manifesting generator,
right,
the key is to respond, is the term. And that means when you talk out loud to someone, their questions of when they're asking you questions about what you just described. And in your response to those questions is how you get clarity.
Yes, this makes total sense. Of course. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is why I cannot stand it when people do not ask me questions.
Right.
To me, it's an indication. It's like, oh, they don't care and they're not curious.
Right. But so it's interesting because Touch, who's also a generator, who has the same decision-making thing, we've had conversations, and she's said to me, and because we're very involved in human design, where she was like, oh, I need more questions from you. Mm-hmm. And so like, I wasn't, because I'm a reflector, I often reflect back, but I wasn't asking her a question. I was like, this is what I heard. Yeah. There wasn't a question.
Totally.
And so for us to meet and her to feel more connected and cared for, if you will, by me, I have learned to ask her questions. Even when I don't have a question that's like percolating, I'm like, oh, no, I need to ask her a question in order for her to feel seen by me in this moment, and also to be in service of her decision-making process.
Yes. And this is something I put on our leadership feedback. I want you to ask more questions. Did you see that? And then May's like, what do you mean? Questions about what? And I didn't know how to answer it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know, but I want questions to be asked of me.
Oh my God, Bravehearts, we just had a breakthrough moment. Live.
That is so funny.
Live at Permission to Be Human. Janelle and Andrea just figured out a better way to
communicate.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, why is it that I need people to ask questions? Like, because this has come up many times. I mean, you're still really a good friend. Like, and I know you reflect all the time, but like, yeah, I'm like, but you don't ask questions.
Mm-hmm. And so I have to, so I'm conscious. It's sort of like a love language. I'm like, oh,
it is a love language.
So I'm with Touch, and now I'll do it with you. Like when she said that, I was like, okay, great. Like I'm happy to change my behavior because I care that you feel connected. Like you
right.
feel.
It is about feeling connected for sure. And I tend to ask questions, and some people don't need questions and they don't want to be asked questions.
Exactly. And so sometimes and that's for me. I'm like, I just need to hear myself talk. I don't need your questions.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So that was huge. Out loud judgment is next. Dissection of gossip versus non-gossip. Yeah. I used to say, oh, well, it feels like it's not gossip if it's not said in a mean-spirited way. And I think that's a great start at the definition, right? Like, I'm not trying to be mean to this person. I'm just like, oh, did you notice X, Y, Z? But when we're judging someone out loud, I think it's worth questioning and saying, like, is this worth putting that energy into the air that's negative, that's talking about someone else when they're not here? And I think that's basically something that I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so for me, the gossip is talking about someone who's not present, right? Versus.
Yes, correct. Okay. Someone who's not present. Mm-hmm. And you said, like, there's insecure energy coming up. Is that what it's about? Like, I don't think there has to be insecure energy coming up for me to be like, I'm noticing this about so-and-so. Like, yeah, it does definitely come back to the spirit in which you share that observation. But yeah, I think the other piece is it something that you would say to them directly, right? That's probably the big question. Totally, which is often how I frame it now. It's like if I'm saying something, I'm like, yes, she knows that I feel this way. Like I would say this to her. She needs to know this.
Right.
That or like
that she does know this.
Correct. Or we've already talked about this.
Right.
Right. That does make it feel safe, I think.
All right. So the question is, what is it that we don't want to be talking about? And telling boring stories. I don't want to be boring. Talking about things that don't substantially change the way I feel or move through the world.
Like, what's an example of that?
So something that, happened to me the other day was that my car died. And, it was, I mentioned, hey, this is what happened. But then I just went on with my day, right? And I didn't here's the update, here's how long it's going to take, here's how much it's going to cost. And I was just like, okay, that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just not that interesting. So I didn't tell you about till now about the car.
Right.
Our car quitting last week.
Right. And the impact of it, right, what I heard in the story was that it actually really impacts my life.
Exactly. Right? And that's when I told you about it.
Exactly.
Rather than being like, oh, guess what happened today? This is terrible.
Right.
No.
It's the reality is being a one-car family is really challenging for us.
Right.
Right. Whereas for me, being a one-car family because Thomas has a car, it didn't actually impact me.
That much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing is not wanting to talk about. I'm really trying hard to stay in the present. So not talking about the future, anticipating what might happen, and also talking about the past, about things I can't change. And I think that especially with the futurizing, right? It can be so much energy can go towards, but then what if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this happens? And then what if none of it happens? And so much energy I feel like I'm expending towards nothing in the end.
Yeah, you're always telling me to stop futurizing. You're always like, yeah, but that hasn't happened yet, Andrea, but you don't know. And I find that I waste a lot of time planning. I mean, we have to plan a ton based on, especially when you're a one-car family. If this happens, and it's in a week. And it's just now I do find that just a week feels so far off. I'm just let's not even go there yet. And then 2 other things happen, and then that thing doesn't even happen anymore.
Right.
And so
that's
it's all
point.
a waste.
Yes.
And that's just for something happening in a week. But you're also talking about but what if I don't have any money for retirement? That's the far futurizing as well.
Yes. But they're both the same it's in the future. And it's not to say, I'm don't ever plan, but it's the moment.
But she does plan a lot less. than me, for example.
Right. I book my flights when I know my dates.
Yeah.
Versus booking my flights because I think, oh my gosh, the prices are going to go up. So I should really be worried. I should figure out when I'm going to travel. It feels like I'm spending too much time of life, like recounting what happened. When it's just like, oh, okay, that happened. And now what? Right. Like,
and now we're here.
And now we're here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big things, probably like the overarching theme of this, is recognizing that our words are energy, like that everything is energy. And so if we're putting an intention into what it is that we're saying and how much energy we're putting into it, like if we're talking about the future into a way in something that we cannot control, then that means we're taking energy away from the present and something we can.
Yeah, and I think this has bigger implications, Bravehearts, in thinking about what is it that you spent an hour talking about with your girlfriend today? Is it a toxic relationship that you don't want anything to do with anymore? Is it the negativity that you don't want to focus on? Because as you talk about that stuff, it gains momentum and it gains juice and it builds in your body and in your being. And that means you're holding space for it, like over and over and over again. So what do we want to be talking about? I want to be talking about my feelings. I definitely want to keep talking about my feelings. Ideas, faith, God, existence, art, music, personal growth, rituals, habits, human behavior, articles, change, the world, death, my health, like just things that are impacting me in a significant way, I think is the main. And obviously, we talk about lots of things on this podcast, like taboo topics, which we're always in favor of.
Yes. Yeah, and things that I want to be talking about are pleasure, freedom, joy, God, conditioning, acceptance, kindness, community, letting go of form, creativity, consciousness,
Permission,
trust, and then teachers and experiences that changed or impacted me.
I feel like this is such a meta topic that impacts all of us all the time. And it really takes stepping back and being like, wait a second, what are we talking about in the house every day? Because sometimes of us are so on autopilot or default. We come in the house and we start talking about It's like, and is that necessary? And, how can we just notice it the next time you're talking about something that doesn't matter to you? Or that isn't important, or that doesn't change how you feel.
Right. And I would also say as a Braveheart homework, right? Just notice at the moment, right? We're not saying making change, like you have to have this list of things you don't want to talk about and do want to talk about, but just notice what it is, how you're feeling, and the energy you're expending when you're talking about certain topics. Just start there.
Yeah. Okay, Bravehearts, we love you.
Thanks for listening.
Do you need permission to be human? You got it.
Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.